Hello, class. Today we're going to deal with glazing, ceramic glazing. First, ceramic is a word that is used to describe an earth element after it has gone through a high temperature. And we're talking about 2000 degrees plus. So, when the clay is dry and solid and no firing, we call this greenware. Once it goes through the fire the first time, we're going to call it bisqueware, Bisque, bisqueware, or you can call it basically you can call it brick, like a brick material type of finish. So once it goes through the first bisque firing, you're going to get a solid ceramic piece, right? Um, what we're going to do after the bisque firing is we're going to glaze the piece. And glazes are, they're unique earth elements that change with high temperature. These glazes are not like paint. They must go through a high temperature process to become like glass. And so when we apply this, we're going to use a paintbrush like this, and we're gonna dip it in here. We're gonna take it to the bisqueware, the already fired clay. We're gonna apply it. When we get a new glaze, we have to wash this off and make sure that it's clean because we don't want to contaminate the glaze that's already inside. Glazes are, again, they're not like paint. You can't mix them because they will become contaminated and they won't perform as well as the pure element. So make sure that you wash your paintbrush in between all of your colors. You can glaze the inside of your object, you can glaze the outside of the object, but you cannot glaze anything that is touching the surface at the bottom. Because if we put glaze here at the bottom and we put it into the kiln is the furnace that we put this in to fire it, that glaze will get stuck down onto the furniture at the bottom of the piece. And then the only way to take it off is by hammering it off or chiseling it off, and it might break your work and it might ruin the kiln. So we don't want to put anything on the bottom of your object. Anything that is touching a surface is not to be glazed. So again, do not glaze the bottom. Do not glaze anything that touches a surface. Okay, so again, the glazes have individual names. This one's called plum. And so what you're going to do is we're going to record what you have on your object, on your piece, so that you can get it right. So your glaze has a name on it. Okay, this one's called plum. And so I'm going to write that down on my notes. And so you're going to write that down on your notes so that you can keep track of what it is you're even looking at, because it's going to look so different from when you applied it first, right? It's going to change because of the high temperature. It's not like regular paint. So when you open these things, of course, it's not going to look bright. It's not going to look shiny. It is a temperature triggered element that needs high temperature for it to go through and change. All right. So for a nice shiny finish like this one here, we need a glaze that is a clear glaze. So you'll see that there's a clear glaze that you have to apply at the end after you apply the regular color glazes, and that'll be the only one that goes on top of another glaze. So you're going to put your primary glaze and then the clear glaze on top. You're also going to record how many times you paint the thing, how many coats of glaze you apply. You can apply one, two, three, four, maybe even up to six coats of the same glaze on top of itself. This will be if you want like a full coverage, very, very nice, bright color. That's what you want. You want like four good coats of glaze. If you want it to be kind of see-through and you want the texture to come through a lot, then you probably want to apply like 2. And if you want it to be really, really faint, then maybe 1 coat of glaze. Okay, so make sure that you experiment with that. Okay, and then once you have your glazes, what I want you to do is, as you're working with your glazes, I want you to jot down this information on a piece of paper. Draw your object, just a really rough sketch is fine. And then for every section, I want you to get the name of the glaze, how many coats of glaze you used, and write that information down for yourself, because this is basically our note. So we're going to make some findings, just like scientists, right? We write down the information and we see the results and we compare, and we make guesstimates based on the information, the data that we collect. So that next time that you produce a ceramic piece, you know more or less what to expect and what colors to use to get the results that you want. Okay, so like I said, you can put a clear on top, right? This is the clear glaze, transparent, clear. You're gonna write down the information of everything that you use. You make sure you clean your brush in between layers of glaze. You apply it to your already fired piece, and we draw it out on a piece of paper to make notes for ourselves. Next time we use ceramic glazes, we know what to expect. All right, so a couple more things about ceramics, right? One thing is that we have to fire these to really, really high temperature. We're talking 2000 plus temperature. And so clay, when it's wet, it has a sort of a sponge-like kind of characteristic, right? If there's water in it, it's going to expand. If there's no water in it, that sponge kind of gets small. So clay acts and reacts that way too. More water, it gets larger. Less water, it shrinks a little bit. And so it shrinks anywhere from, it could be anywhere from 2% shrinkage to 5 to even 10% shrinkage. Certain clays shrink a lot more. The clay that we use in the classroom shrinks about 3 to 5%. So when you create something, right, when you create a ceramic piece and there's a lot of texture like this one, you have a higher chance of it surviving because it's nice and even throughout. And because of the even quality and the texture quality of it, it allows the water to exit the material faster and get to its point a little bit faster. Now the score lines, if you're scoring the piece, right? If you're scoring the piece, if you're marking the piece, and your score lines are not too deep, then the piece will survive a little bit more. But if you make your if you make your piece a little bit too deep, like your score marks are too deep, then the shrinking in the kiln will happen. And this one actually had a bubble on the bottom. Looks like a bubble of pocket of air. You can see where it exploded off the back, and it split right down the middle where the score mark was on this piece. Okay, so when you're marking your ceramic, you want to make sure you don't dig too deep into it, and make sure that it's nice and even, and allow the clay to dry out a little more by including a lot of texture on it. This would be a really good example of good amount of texture on the piece. This is the kiln furniture. This is what goes inside of the furnace, the kiln furnace, for the firings, right? Now, if you put glaze on the bottom of your piece and we set it on top, if there's glaze down here and we set it down here on top, it's going to fuse together. It's basically going to weld together. And the only way to get that off is going to be to chisel it off and hope that I can separate this stuff without breaking it. But usually it breaks and it shatters, and it's very difficult to recover from that. So make sure that you are mindful of that you don't put any glazes on the bottom. Also, when you apply a glaze, make sure that you apply it nice and thick and you don't leave little gaps. Also, don't paint the bottom of your object, right? Because we don't want that to stick onto the piece. So make it a good effort and be mindful of how you use the materials.